What is IVF, and steelman it for me?
You know, people might be horrified I'm going to say this.
I don't even know what IVF is.
Stephanie? I'm going to answer what IVF is, but I honestly feel like every time someone uses the term steelman, I have to Google it and be like, what is that again? What am I supposed to do?
Give me the strongest case. You know, it's a relatively recent term.
People would be horrified. They're like, Stephanie Gray Connors doesn't know what's And honestly, I have to Google it every time. I'm like, shoot, what is it again?
No, that's fine.
I can give the best argument.
Yeah, so you know, it's funny. One of my most viewed videos on the channel, it's got like 1.5 or 6 million views, was you
on the violinist.
Steelmanning the violinist argument and then ripping it apart. So what is IVF?
Yeah.
Because there are people who are like, I don't really know. I think I should know. I feel bad that I don't know. Maybe how you feel bad that you don't know what steelmanning is.
Yeah.
And then kind of give the most compelling case for it, and then we can...
Yep, and then we'll unpack it. So first we'll talk about what it is, and then I'll make that compelling case. So IVF, literally in vitro fertilization, means in glass, vitro, in glass, fertilization. So creating life in glass. So what happens is, instead of sex being the normal way that offspring would come to be, eggs are harvested from a woman, which means she is given injections of a drug that will cause her ovary to release more eggs than is normal per cycle. So in one cycle, a woman would release 1, maybe 2 eggs, most likely 1 egg. So in hyperstimulating her ovaries, an IVF specialist will try to get maybe 10, 20, or 30 eggs. We'll see how many they get, but that would be a good harvest, you could say. Now, if you think about a woman releasing 1 egg a month, 12 months in a year, 12 eggs a year, we're talking, if you get 24 eggs, you're getting 2 years worth of eggs in one sitting. Okay, so eggs are taken and they're extracted through a tiny needle from her body, kept in a lab. Sperm is obtained from a man, typically through masturbation. Technically, a couple could have sex with a perforated condom in which some of the semen would go in her body, but some would be collected in the condom, and could bring the condom in with what remains. But that is not typically how it is. I would suspect someone who's... I'm just going to say it's possible.
Someone who's pro-IVF probably isn't like hung up about
masturbation. Right, yeah. But just because for the person out there who's like, well, I could do it in an ethical way. I could find a way around this.
Okay, so semen.
And even that we could question. But anyways, so you get a semen sample, and then that also goes to the lab. So then you've got your glass Petri dish, and you've got your scientist who takes the eggs, and it takes an egg and then takes either a sample of sperm, puts them all in the dish, and it's watch and see which sperm go and fertilize that egg. Or you can do a procedure called ICSI, ICSI, where the scientist will take 1 sperm that they select to be of good caliber, good quality, and inject it into the egg. Either way, you get fertilization in glass. They watch to see if that new human being starts to develop and grow through the cellular stages of 1 cell, 2 cell, 4 cell, 8, and multiply each time. Then typically this embryo would be subjected to genetic testing to see if there are any genetic anomalies. Once a good quality embryo is identified, then a couple will return, or even the woman could come by herself. The man's presence is not necessary, which we'll go into as we unpack this topic. But then she goes, and the embryo or a couple embryos will be inserted via catheter into her uterus, and it's a watch and see whether that embryo then implants. So the doctors don't implant the embryo, they insert the embryo, and then they wait and see if that human being burrows into the uterine wall and grows for 9 months. So that's the basics of IVF. Those who want to argue that it's good, and let's talk about those who might think they have the stronger case. The couple that's married that's having a difficult time conceiving. Because in a moment, we can talk about all these other cases like a homosexual couple, people that aren't even related, someone who just wants a baby and they go find a sperm seller. Let's take, you've got a married couple. Let's say they're Christian, whether it's Catholic or Protestant. They love the Lord and they love the Lord's word. And the Lord's word says the first command is be fruitful and multiply. And there are passages in the scriptures that talk about the blessing of children, the reward that children are, and they are experiencing the terrible cross of infertility and can't seem to get pregnant. And they say, well, we're to be fruitful and multiply. We're a married couple, and we believe in sex is for marriage because you should only produce children with your spouse. So we're going to take my egg and his sperm and not anyone else's, and we're going to go to a lab. And just as I could have someone help me if I have a heart condition and need to take heart meds, and I rely on external help to keep my heart healthy, I'm going to rely on external help here to achieve the command to be fruitful and multiply. And I'm going to pursue IVF, and I'm going to have a child that we raise to love the Lord. That's what I think someone could say is the strongest argument in favor.
Or to say it more colloquially, something like, why would it be wrong to use modern science to bring a new life into the world who we love, especially when so many are being wantonly killed?
Right. So I would say, in general, it's not wrong to pursue modern science. That can be a gift the Lord gives us and the intellect of other people and the skill of other people can be how God works through others to restore shalom. And I have a chapter on shalom in my book where I talk about shalom, was a word in the time of Christ. Jews would use that as a greeting, like shalom, shalom, peace. It means peace. But there are so many more references to shalom in what it was intended at the time than simply a greeting of peace. Shalom was this wish for and a desire to work towards the total fullness of the person and how things ought to be in a right ordered fashion. And so infertility is a sign of things going wrong. So it is good to want to have shalom, to want to right order everything to the way it was meant to be in the beginning when God gave us the command to be fruitful and multiply at a time where IVF didn't exist. So obviously at that point, to be fruitful and multiply would have to occur through sexual intimacy.
You guys have got to check out 7 Weeks Coffee. They are pro-life, mold-free, organic. The coffee is delicious. Go to 7weekscoffee.com. Click the link in the description. And also down there, you'll figure out how you can save 25% off your first order. 7weekscoffee.com.
Where that has gone wrong and we don't have everything working together, is it good to seek to restore and correct things? In principle, yes. In practice, we have to look at morally how we do that. So if you have a woman whose fallopian tube is blocked so that her egg cannot travel down to meet the sperm who are traveling up, the fallopian tube is supposed to be unblocked. So going to have surgery to unblock the fallopian tube is a good thing. If she has polycystic ovarian, PCOS syndrome, and it is difficult due to the leathery skin of the ovary for eggs to be released, then she can have wedge resection surgery where a section of the ovary is cut out and the skin stretched to make it thinner so that eggs actually can break through that thinner area. And then when intercourse happens, then the sperm can hopefully get to the egg and fertilize it. So that's using science, that's using technology. We're taking a body part that's essentially broken and we're fixing it. Like Jesus and his apostles did when someone was blind and they restored sight, or someone had leprosy and they touched them to heal them of that terrible illness. God did it himself through Jesus, and then God worked through others like the apostles and used them. So he can work through others like the doctor who does that restorative surgery on the fallopian tube or on the ovary. The difference between using science there and using science in the creation of life is we're no longer taking a part that is broken and fixing it and restoring it to how it ought to be. We're taking an approach God designed for offspring to come into existence, sexual intimacy, and we're throwing it out, like you did my book, over the shoulder. We're like, forget that. We're totally replacing it. Okay, then we can say, well, is that necessarily bad? So then we ask the question, what are we replacing it with? Well, we're replacing it with a process which manufactures a human person. And that, I would say that word is the key reason why IVF ought to be rejected. That human persons are subjects and not objects. Objects are things we make and we manufacture, and we use our skills to bring parts together to create something new. And if it isn't made the way we want, or if we change our mind, we thought we wanted it and we want something different, we can return, we can replace, we can discard. That's how we treat objects. Subjects are different. Subjects ought not to be replaced, discarded, returned for something, money back guarantee. Human persons as subjects should not be manufactured the way objects are, because we are different. We are made in God's image, and we should therefore be received as a fruit of two people coming together in a communion of persons, rather than our very existence being contracted out to a third party, someone who's not part of the marital commitment, and a party that is disconnected, unrelated, and then say, hey, can you make a baby for me the way you could make a car, the way you could make something else? When you do that, you're also creating a kind of a mindset like we almost have a right to a baby. Even when a couple comes together in sexual intimacy, there is no guarantee if they'll get pregnant, what moment they'll get pregnant, right? You can have sex, but there's no egg until 5 hours after sexual intimacy. And then which sperm from that sexual intimacy, which sperm is actually going to fertilize that egg? When is that going to happen? All of that through sexual intimacy is your hands on, but your hands off, right? Like you're like, it's in your hands, God. Whereas the moment you go down the path of manufacturing, you're like, I'm going to force this person into existence. That's success. Not getting someone is the failure rate of IVF. You want success. So you want to get the life, then you want to make sure it goes to term. So what are you doing? You're starting to have a mindset of, well, do we do genetic testing? Because we want to make sure this is the highest caliber, quality embryo, but what does that even mean, right? So you can unpack all of that. But the whole point is you are making someone who should be received as opposed to forced into existence. Then there's all these other elements of, like we talked about, typically you're using masturbation to obtain the sperm. And a way I kind of like to look at it as, with sexual intimacy, you always have to have a communion of persons. The male and female have to come together. And then even when they're apart, right, if fertilization happens while the husband goes to work and she's doing the dishes, there's still a communion of persons because the baby is now coming into existence beneath the mother's heart. With IVF, you have total separation of every aspect of the relationship. Can the man be there holding his wife's hand? Sure, while her eggs are being extracted, he can, but he's not necessary. Getting the eggs out does not require his presence. It might be a nice feature, but he's not necessary for the completion of that act. Could they have sex with a perforated condom? When he's masturbating, could she be in the room that the science lab or the IVF lab has for getting your sample? She could be, but is she necessary for the sperm to be collected? She's not. So that all is separated. Then could the couple say, well, we just want to be in the lab and hang out while you're making life in vitro? We just want to look through the window. I guess if the lab lets them, they could. I don't know if anyone's ever asked for that, but the point is they're not necessary for that to happen. Their presence is not necessary.
Communion is not necessary.
Communion is not necessary. Everything is separated and broken. Whereas with sexual intimacy, you absolutely must have communion. With life beneath the heart, you must have communion. When you have sex with your spouse and an embryo comes into existence, 100% guarantee that's your child with your spouse. There is no sperm flying from a house next door coming into the picture here. The moment you go from a receptivity perspective in sexual intimacy through that communion of persons, the moment you shift from that to the manufacturing mindset, the moment you contract out a third party, and instead of parts coming in or staying in, parts are going out to that third party, you are now inviting in natural human error that can then lead to the creation of life, that if we're coming from a Judeo-Christian perspective that you should only create offspring with your spouse, and we use that first example I gave, and there's a whole bunch of other ones we can talk about, but if you just use the woman's egg, the wife's egg, and you just use the husband's sperm, you manufacture and contract out to a third party, you're inviting in human error where they might use, by just mistake, the wrong eggs. They might grab the wrong sperm, or they've got one right but one wrong. Oh, it happens, and increasingly all the time. I'm going to give you some examples. Put them together in the lab. So they now created an embryo who's the wife's baby, but not the husband's. They don't realize it. So then they insert it. Or they create the baby with the wife's egg and the husband's sperm. And then they watch the embryo grow. And then they freeze the embryo for a bit. And then they're ready for insertion. And human error, oops, we've grabbed the wrong embryo and inserted this embryo in the woman. So now technically, this husband and wife are bringing into the world, I mean, the child already exists through IVF, but they're bringing into the world now someone who, from their Judeo-Christian perspective, morally speaking, should never morally come into existence because it's now offspring that's not theirs, that's growing in her body. So does this happen? Absolutely. I mean, if you go onto YouTube or just Google in general and you type in IVF gone wrong, mind will be blown. And these are the cases we know about. So there was a story I read recently of an Asian couple who pursued IVF and give birth to a baby with absolutely no Asian features. They become suspicious as time goes on and their child is developing. And they go back to the IVF clinic. We think something might be wrong here. So then the paper trail begins and they start looking at things. We implanted the wrong embryo. Or we used the wrong. I don't remember which one it was. But then there was the realization, once that's the case, well, then does that biological child go to the actual biological parent? So there are stories now, and again, I'm not making this up, you can see it all over the internet, of couples who have gestated a child they think is their own, birthed a child they think is their own, spent the first couple months raising and loving and bonding with a child they think is their own, realize it's not, and then having to legally hand that child over. Not only severing their bond with the child, but the child's bond with them. Again, we go back to what I was talking about, like Erica Commissar, in terms of the bonding a child has with their primary caregiver. And you are ripping that bond because of an error in a lab that just can't happen with sexual intimacy. You will never get that error. So even if a couple says, well, we'll only use mine and his, and we'll do this, and there is just always a risk that, there was another case of a woman who, a white woman who picked a sperm seller. It's so funny how people think, because she thought his features were a lot like hers. Isn't that funny? I mean, it just sounds so self-absorbed. It's like, I picked him because he was like me, So anyways, she picked him because he looked like her. Here she is, a white woman. She gives birth to a baby that's half black. So she's like, that's not the sperm seller I picked. Now, in the interview, she's like, I'm not racist. Like, I have no problem with a black baby. It's just, it's not who I picked. So therefore, not only did she realize it's not who I picked, but then she realized, well, then whose sperm made this baby? And is there a legal right that father, biological father, has to this child? And she actually had to relinquish the child. So when you manufacture a subject the way you manufacture an object, you are going to get all kinds of problems that you naturally get when you manufacture things. But the problem is, humans aren't things. Humans are people, and people are subjects and ought to be treated differently.
Thanks very much for watching that clip. You can click the link below if you want to watch the full interview, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.